Welcome back to the channel. As you can see, we're going to be talking about my insane submarine design again. Just posted a video a couple of days ago showing the changes to my design from its Mark I version, as well as reiterating some of the reasons why I think this is a cool design, why you might want to consider doing a design like this, and you know, the specifics of why the specifics of why I made the changes that I made. Be sure to go check out that video. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description so that you can kind of get caught up. But today's video is going to be mostly focusing on one of the primary limitations of something like this, and that's fuel. So once you're done watching that video over there and kind of getting up to speed on my, out there thought process on this, come back over here and we'll talk about that. Before we get too far in the video, I'd like to ask you to help us reach 10,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button, hit the like button to spread the video out to more people. And then I do mostly gaming content. This is kind of a separate thing, but I am trying to branch out into more stuff. Be sure to head over to the channel, check out the more than 1,700 other videos available on the channel, organized in a nice, neat playlist to help you find whatever it is you're looking for. So be sure to go do that when you're done here. So anybody who knows anything about traveling on the water knows that there's a reason why most cruising done by small families or individuals is done by sailboat. And that's because you need a certain amount, sorry if the trailer is shaking, there's my washing machine's going right now. And I live in a travel trailer and it shakes everything. It's because you need a certain size of vessel to be able to carry enough fuel for that vessel to be able to travel the distances required to do an oceanic crossing. The vast majority of the yacht-sized vessels out there, whether they be sailboats or whether they be powerboats, typically don't have anywhere near enough fuel capacity in them to be able to take you from even just the east coast of the United States over to Europe, much less trying to cross the Pacific, which is a much longer distance. So obviously, if you're looking at a design like this, which is intended to be a yacht-sized submarine application that is intended to be a long-range travel option, one of the things that you're going to have to resolve is figuring out getting enough fuel on board to be able to go and do those long voyages without having to stop off to refuel. Now, that maybe that could be accomplished in several ways. You make sure that you plot your journey across to make sure you're hitting islands that have refueling stations. You might be able to figure that out. I have to imagine with enough planning, you could probably find enough places, enough like oases on the ocean out there to allow you to be able to, refuel before you run out of fuel. But realistically, unless you can figure out a way to put enough fuel in here to get you from one side to the other all on its own, you're taking a big risk doing that because you run into some bad weather, you run into a problem here, you run into a problem there, and then you don't have enough fuel to get where you're trying to get to, and then you're stranded. So, my thought process right now is something along the lines of trying to figure out some kind of a hybrid system. So, as ridiculous as it sounds, and as impractical as it probably is, it occurs to me that the medium through which we are traveling in our submarine is it technically contains a fuel source for us. Through the process of electrolysis, you are able to separate hydrogen from oxygen, at which time you can use that hydrogen to do one of two things that I'm aware of personally. There may be more options. You can either burn it using the oxygen that you separated out as a fuel, as the oxidizer, and then you basically, so you're using electrolysis to separate the hydrogen and the oxygen from each other. Then you put it back into a steam engine, because modern nuclear submarines use steam power to run their ships. So this isn't an insane idea. Modern ships still use steam power if they're nuclear powered. That's how it works. So convert that over to a hydrogen fuel source rather than a nuclear fuel source, and you're basically taking you purify the water first. Obviously, you need to run it through a reverse osmosis system or whatever like that to purify it. Run it through electrolysis, separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, feed it into whatever burner setup that you have, burn it, heat up a separate set of water that is your closed loop steam turbine setup. The turbine runs the propeller, runs a generator, which the generator runs the electrolysis machine along with the rest of the stuff for the sub, and it's kind of a continuing cycle. Now, obviously, if you know anything about science, you know that you would never be able to make that an indefinite loop of sustainability, because there is no such thing as free energy. There's all kinds of videos out there trying to claim that we've figured out free energy, but it doesn't work that way. The purpose of this hybrid... Oh, and then, okay, so let me finish my thought process, and then we'll get to the purpose. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I do that too much. So ideally, because you have the entropy problem where you're not going to be able to keep a self-sustaining loop, because there's going to be efficiency losses, there's going to be load losses, all kinds of things that are going to reduce your ability to continue that cycle. You're going to have a certain amount of time where you're going to run out of fuel. And then ideally you would have the diesel generator available so that you can either surface or do my, snorkeling up to the getting close enough to the surface to send out your little floating snorkel back here, use the umbilical, run the diesel generator to power the electrolysis to build up your hydrogen and whatever reserves, and ideally get yourself to the point where you can submerge back down again for an extended period of time. So that's kind of the reason I'm kind of I'm thinking about this hybrid process. And I don't know enough about any of this stuff to know if it's even reasonable to be thinking along these lines. But unless you ask the question, you don't know. So I'm putting it out into the world, hoping that maybe that's something that could actually be a thought. My thought is that if we treat this submarine less like something that is intended to be submerged indefinitely and more like a whale, which, submerges for extended periods of time, comes back up, takes a breath, sinks back down. If we could design a fuel and engine setup that allows us to run for extended periods of time underwater, and then, every once in a while we have to come up for air to be able to run the basic diesel motor to kind of stock back up on everything, then I think that would actually be really cool. If you could get it to where maybe you only have to be up on the surface for 2 or 3 hours a day, and then because you have this hydrogen setup that's, it doesn't last forever, but maybe it's able to run submerged long enough for you to stay submerged, for most of the time that you're running underwater, for most of the time that you're running, then, it does. I think the half-assed logic in the back of my head tells me that it does a couple of things. First and foremost, you're limiting the amount of diesel fuel that you have to carry with you, because you're only having to run it for a few hours a day, which means that you're getting most of your power from the hydrogen that you're sucking out of the seawater. Now, my thought process on that is that while you're not getting something for nothing, but ideally if you're able to burn the hydrogen or the other idea I had, I didn't get to the second part. The other idea I had was hydrogen cells. We have hydrogen cells that run electric cars now, and that could run the electric motor here for this system. So either a steam turbine setup by burning the hydrogen, or maybe a hydrogen cell technology that generates a separate electrical thing for the motors, right? But ideally, some of that power would be sent back to do the electrolysis process to convert the hydrogen that we either burn in the steam turbine setup, or it gets converted back into water through the hydrogen cell technology that we have now. Either way, it turns it back into water, and we just keep cycling it back through and reconverting it back into something that's usable for energy production. Now, obviously, I don't know if you could create a setup that would power the electric motor to run the propeller, provide enough electricity for the boat as a whole to run all of its systems, and also run the electrolysis process at an efficient enough way to where, you can't get indefinite power out of it, but you're at least extending the time through which you're able to, keep going. So my intuition tells me that that's probably not possible, or somebody would have done it by now, because, there are ways to extend your period underwater by storing hydrogen and all of that kind of stuff, but that still means you're going to have to spend a fair amount of time on the surface running a traditional fossil fuel motor or some other kind of energy production to run the electrolysis. But my thought process is just, like I said, it's not intended to be indefinite. It's intended to be like hey, we're running this hydrogen-powered engine setup here, and while we're running that, we're siphoning off some of that power to run electrolysis to generate more hydrogen and oxygen to feed back into that system and continue using it. And ideally, if you can engineer it properly, maybe you could get it to the point where you could get, 12, 15 hours maybe, or even longer, depending on, maybe some engineers know some tricks to make that work better. But if you could get, even if they only get it to the point where, you have to you can only go for 9 or 10 hours, and then you have to come up for 2 hours. I mean, even just coming up twice a day would be really cool if you could figure out a system to make it do that. And that way you can spend most of your time chilling out under the ocean, because if you're doing an ocean crossing, you're not really worried about seeing anything. There's nothing to see. It's just endless ocean for as far as the eye can see. Whereas underwater, you can see any animals and stuff that might be swimming by. So my goal isn't to create the only way to do that, as far as I'm to do indefinite submersion, is nuclear power, which is not something that's accessible to the general public. So, for those of us who might have an interest in trying to create an alternative version of a submarine like this that allows us to stay underwater for extended periods of time, we got to come up with some kind of a fuel option that allows us to travel long distances, and preferably in a way that minimizes our need to use the kind of fuels that people tend to hate these days. So, I don't know. I've been trying to think my way through this problem, and I've thought through it about as much as I'm capable of thinking through it. My intuition tells me that the amount of energy required to convert water back into hydrogen and oxygen is probably more than the system can generate itself. But I don't know. It's hard when you're trying to do research on your own to find sources and things like that will give you this information in a way that makes sense to you, and when you don't have an engineering background. But it would be nice if we could develop some kind of a hybrid engine system that makes it so that we're running off of hydrogen, which is abundantly available around us in the ocean. You convert the seawater into pure water, into fresh water, the fresh water into hydrogen and oxygen. You either burn it or run it through whatever hydrogen cell that we have that converts it back into fresh water again, and just keep looping it back through until you run out of fuel. And then when you start getting low on fuel, you go back up to the surface, kick on the diesel engine, fill up the hydrogen tanks. Fill up. I think you would probably have to have a tank that stores hydrogen and stores oxygen or something like that. I don't really know. But you kick it up. You use the diesel engine to fill the hydrogen and oxygen tanks back up to hopefully give you another, 9, 10 hours. Sink back down, and you're good to go for most of the day. It seems to make sense in my head, except for the fact that I know enough about science to know that using the system to recreate its own fuel doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know if that's even a feasible thought. That's why I'm posting it online. Maybe some people who know more than me will come across this video and either point out or will say, yeah, you're right, that's not feasible because of the way energy works, or yeah, that would be possible. You could get some extended range out of that, and you would save on diesel with this idea. So I don't know. It's just, I like to put random thoughts out there. This is mostly just a spark discussion, not necessarily because I think I have a crazy, awesome idea. I don't think. Otherwise, I'd be trying to patent it. I'm mostly just trying to spark some discussion. So this is my idea. Hopefully that ends up working out. The other issue that I have with the design is that, like I was saying in the previous video, I want some flat bottom drop weights to make it so you can bottom the boat and exit using this little elevator setup that I was talking about here. But the issue that I have here is that I'm not sure how much buoyancy this would have once you pack it with all the equipment and tanks and all that other stuff it's going to have. It might be pretty close to being ready to submerge before you put drop weights on it, just by all of the stuff that it would have in it. So again, you would have to do some calculations for how much air you're going to have in there, how much volume you're going to have, how much buoyancy you're going to have from the displacement that you're creating, versus all of the weighing down objects in there, plus the drop weights that I want to put on there for safety reasons. So This is another one of those things where this is why I said in my original video, there's a million things that need to be adjusted, and realistically, it's going to take some kind of an engineer who knows about submarine design to take this and convert it into something that actually makes sense in the real world. This is me just imagining something and wishing I could figure out a way to do it. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and stop babbling about this now. This may or may not be the last video about this. If I think of something else that I feel is important enough to make a video about, I will go ahead and do that. But the fuel system is the last little kind of random thought that keeps rattling around in my head, and I'm trying to think about the best way to try to make that work. Even though this is never going to be a thing. I'm never going to have the kind of money that is needed to build something like this. But it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting fantasy, and I like to indulge my fantasies this way. So hopefully you liked it. Click the like button. Subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. You can join as a member to get early access to all of my videos, or you can leave YouTube's version of a tip in the thanks button. So thanks for watching. Be sure to come back for the next gaming video that we put out, and I'll see you then.